You can't do this. I will ruin you. I will burn your whole life to the ground. Her voice was a shriek, a sound like metal tearing, echoing off the wood-paneled walls of the community center meeting room. Her face, usually a mask of smug superiority, was a contorted mess of purple rage. Two sheriff's deputies, looking profoundly bored, were holding her by the elbows as she thrashed. It was not a good look. I just stood there at the podium, microphone in hand, and watched the spectacle. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just watched her empire of petty tyranny, built on flimsy bylaws and intimidation, crumble into dust around her. I had designed its collapse with the same precision I once used to design bridges. And it was just as structurally sound. It all started, as these things so often do, with a view. When my wife, Helen, passed away, the world lost its color. For a year, I existed in a grayscale fog, going through the motions of life in the big city house we'd shared for 3 decades. It was full of ghosts and memories, and every corner held a fresh wave of grief. My kids were grown, with lives of their own, and they worried. They suggested a change, a fresh start. I resisted, of course. It felt like a betrayal. But one day, my daughter dragged me out to see a property in a community called Eagle's Crest, about an hour outside the city. I went to appease her, my mind already set on declining. The development was perched on a ridge overlooking the sprawling serenity of the Redwood Valley. Most of the houses were cookie-cutter McMansions, but this one was different. It was an older build, from before the Homeowners Association had sunk its claws deep into the area. It was modest, well-built, and it had a deck. And from that deck, you could see everything. The entire valley unfurled below like a map of tranquility. You could see the river snaking through the trees, the distant shimmer of the reservoir, and the rolling green hills that faded into a hazy blue horizon. Helen would have loved it. The thought hit me not with pain, but with a quiet, certain warmth. She would have sat out here with me every morning, coffee in hand, and we would have watched the world wake up. I bought the house that week. I was a retired structural engineer. I understood foundations, stress loads, and the importance of a solid base. This house, this view, felt like a new foundation on which I could rebuild my life. I spent the first few months making it my own, planting a small garden in Helen's memory with her favorite flowers, lavender and echinacea, and settling into a quiet rhythm. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of peace. That peace was named Carol. I first encountered her in print, via the Eagle's Crest HOA monthly newsletter. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive prose, filled with thinly veiled warnings about aesthetic harmony and community standards. Her photo was on the first page. Carol Bradshaw, HOA president. She had a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and the general demeanor of someone who enjoys telling other people what to do. My first direct interaction came a month later. I was on my deck, enjoying the sunset, when her voice cut through the evening air like a power saw. "Excuse me. You there?" I turned to see her standing on the edge of her property, which was adjacent to mine, one lot over. Her house was one of the newer, larger ones, a beige palace with an immaculate lawn that looked like it was cut with surgical scissors. She had her hands on her hips, her posture radiating indignation. "Are you the new owner?" she asked, her tone suggesting I had acquired the property through illicit means. "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. "Frank Miller. Nice to meet you." "Carol Bradshaw," she announced, as if I should already know. "I'm the president of the HOA. I just wanted to inform you that your garbage receptacles are visible from the street. They need to be stored out of sight, per bylaw 714-inch. I glanced toward my driveway. My 2 bins were tucked neatly against the side of my garage, as they had been for weeks. You could only see the very edge of one of them, and only if you were standing at a very specific, and rather unnatural, angle on the road. "I'll take care of it," I said, not wanting a confrontation. It was a petty rule, but a small price to pay for peace. "See that you do," she sniffed, before turning and marching back to her house. That was it. No welcome to the neighborhood, no friendly introduction. Just a citation from the fun police. It was a sign, like a hairline crack in a foundation. I noted it, but I didn't appreciate its full significance. Not yet. The inciting incident, The event that would ultimately lead to her spectacular downfall came about 2 months later. It arrived in the form of a certified letter. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, official and ominous. Inside, on thick, creamy letterhead bearing the Eagle's Crest HOA logo, was a Notice of Community Improvement Project. My eyes scanned the jargon-filled paragraphs. It spoke of enhancing privacy, ensuring aesthetic uniformity, and improving property values. Then I got to the meat of it. The HOA board, under the decisive leadership of President Carol Bradshaw, had voted to approve the construction of a 6-foot-high, solid-panel, privacy wall along the common property line at the rear of several homes, including mine. I read it again. And again. I walked out onto my deck and looked at the view, the one I had paid a premium for, the one that served as my daily connection to my late wife's memory. I traced the property line with my eyes. The proposed wall would run directly along the edge of the ridge. It would be a 6-foot-tall, opaque barrier. It would completely, and with malice aforethought, erase my view. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat of disbelief and anger. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. I looked over at Carol's house. Her deck, I noted with a sudden, cold clarity, was on the 2nd story. A 6-foot wall wouldn't touch her view. It would only serve to block the view of the handful of single-story homes, like mine, that sat just below the crest of the ridge. This wasn't a community improvement project. It was a targeted attack. The question was, why? I had complied with her garbage can nonsense. I kept my lawn neat. I was a quiet, unassuming retiree. What could I possibly have done to warrant this? I attended the next HOA meeting, held in the drab, linoleum-floored community center. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban ennui. About 15 residents were scattered among the folding chairs. Carol sat at a long table at the front, flanked by a nervous-looking man who was presumably the treasurer and a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. When the floor was open for new business, I stood up. "Frank Miller, 42 Crestview Lane," I began, my voice calm and measured. "I have a question about the Community Improvement Project, specifically, the privacy wall." Carol's eyes narrowed. "It's not a question," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The board has already voted. The decision is final. With all due respect, a decision that directly impacts the property value and quality of life for multiple residents should be discussed, not decreed," I countered. "My home was purchased primarily for its view of the valley. This wall would eliminate that view entirely." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The wall is for the privacy and security of the entire community," Carol said, emphasizing entire as if I were a selfish child. "Some residents," she added, with a pointed look in my direction, "don't appreciate having their backyards overlooked." It was a lie, and we both knew it. My property didn't overlook anyone. It overlooked 1,000 acres of undeveloped state park. Who, exactly? I pressed. Whose privacy is being protected? The deer? The squirrels? Because my property borders the nature preserve. The only thing behind my house is wilderness. The board's decision is final, Mr. Miller, she repeated, her voice turning sharp as flint. The project is moving forward. If you don't like it, perhaps Eagle's Crest isn't the right community for you. The threat was clear. Fall in line or get out. I looked around the room, hoping for an ally, a single voice of support. I got nothing but averted eyes and nervous coughs. They were all terrified of her. I sat down, my mind racing. This was not a reasonable person. Reason would not work. Logic had no purchase here. I had spent my life solving problems with physics and mathematics, with concrete and steel. I dealt with tangible forces, with stress and load, tension and compression. This was a different kind of problem. This was a problem of ego and power. But the principles, I realized, were the same. Every structure has a weakness. Every tyrant has a pressure point. I just needed to find hers. The harassment started the following week. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to bleed me dry of patience and will. I received a fine for my grass being 1/4 of an inch too high. A violation notice because the paint on my mailbox was, allegedly, not the pre-approved shade of eggshell. A warning about unauthorized horticulture, which referred to Helen's memorial garden. Each notice was a fresh jab, a reminder of who was in charge. I paid the fines, painted the mailbox, and sent the board a polite but firm letter explaining the sentimental value of the garden, attaching a list of the non-invasive, native plants it contained. I documented everything. I took photos, made copies of the notices, and kept a detailed log of every interaction. An old habit from my engineering days: when a system is failing, you gather data. The construction on the wall began a month later. I watched from my deck as a crew, working for a company called Bradshaw and Sons Construction, began to sink posts into the ground. The name was a little too on the nose to be a coincidence. The noise of the nail guns was a constant, percussive assault, each shot feeling like a nail in the coffin of my peaceful retirement. With every panel they erected, another slice of my beautiful valley disappeared. First the river was gone. Then the reservoir. Soon, all I had left was a sliver of sky above a monolithic wall of cheap, pressure-treated pine. The deck, once my sanctuary, became a prison yard. That was when the annoyance curdled into cold, hard resolve. But the true turning point, the moment I decided that simple defense was no longer enough, came a week after the wall was completed. I received another certified letter. This one was from the HOA's lawyer. It stated that Helen's garden was in violation of community bylaws regarding landscaping uniformity. It accused the garden of being an eyesore and a potential source of invasive species. It gave me 30 days to remove it completely and replace it with pre-approved sod, or the HOA would have it professionally removed at my expense and place a lien on my property. They were coming for the last piece of her I had left. I sat on my deck, staring at the ugly, oppressive wall, the lawyer's letter trembling in my hand. They hadn't just taken my view. They hadn't just harassed me with petty fines. Now, they were trying to rip out the living memorial to my wife. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to break me. But they had miscalculated. They thought I was an old man who would roll over. They didn't understand that you can't break something that's already been broken. Grief had burned away all my fear, all my hesitation. All that was left was the steel underneath. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, the one I'd barely used since retiring, and I opened my old laptop. I had spent a lifetime designing structures to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and the simple, relentless force of gravity. Now, I would design the demolition of Carol Bradshaw. The project had begun. My first step was reconnaissance. Every good engineer studies the terrain before drawing up a single blueprint. I needed to understand the structure of the HOA, the bylaws that Carol wielded like a weapon, and most importantly, Carol herself. I started with the bylaws. I requested a full, updated copy from the HOA board, a request they were legally obligated to fulfill. They sent me a poorly scanned PDF that was almost unreadable. It was a deliberate inconvenience, another small act of hostility. I spent a full day cleaning up the document, running it through optical character recognition software, and converting it into a searchable text file. Then I read it. All 127 pages of it. I read it with the same focus I once used to read building codes, highlighting clauses, cross-referencing sections, and making notes in the margins. It was a labyrinth of legalese and petty restrictions, but like any code, it had rules. And rules had loopholes. Next, I went to the county records office. I spent hours poring over plat maps, property deeds, and original zoning permits for the Eagles Crest development. I was looking for discrepancies, for the cracks in the foundation. And I found one. It was small, but it was there. The strip of land where Carol had built her spite wall was designated as a utility and drainage easement on the original master plan. While the HOA was responsible for its maintenance, building a permanent, 6-foot-tall structure on it was a flagrant violation of the easement's terms. It was a start. It was leverage. But it wasn't enough. Tearing down the wall would be a victory, but it wouldn't address the root problem. It wouldn't stop Carol. I needed more. My investigation turned to the money. I submitted a formal request for the HOA's complete financial records for the past 3 years, including all invoices and receipts for the wall project. Again, they were legally obligated to comply, but they made it as difficult as possible. What I received was a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and a crudely formatted spreadsheet that was a masterpiece of obfuscation. I spent the next week meticulously inputting every single receipt into a new, properly structured accounting spreadsheet. I cross-referenced every expenditure with the budget. A picture began to emerge. A very ugly picture. The costs were astronomical. The HOA had paid Bradshaw and Sons Construction nearly double the market rate for the wall. The materials listed on the invoices were premium cedar, but I could see from my own deck that the wood used was cheap pine. The labor costs were wildly inflated. It reeked of fraud. Bradshaw and Sons, it had to be a relation. A quick search of public records confirmed it. The owner of the construction company was a man named Dennis Bradshaw, Carol's brother-in-law. It was a classic kickback scheme, hidden in plain sight. She was using HOA funds, her neighbor's money, to enrich her own family, all under the guise of community improvement. This was more than just a bylaw violation. This was a felony. While I was digging through the paperwork, I was also fortifying my own position. I installed a comprehensive security system around my property. Not just a burglar alarm, but high-definition cameras with night vision and motion sensors covering every angle of my house and yard. I placed them discreetly, but their coverage was total. Any interaction on my property would be recorded in crystal-clear audio and video. It was an insurance policy. Now I had the data. I had found the structural weaknesses. It was time to draw up the blueprints for my counteroffensive. It would be a multi-phase operation. Phase 1 was the bait. Phase 2 would be the trap. And Phase 3 would be the public demolition. My plan was rooted in the very bylaws she used as her cudgel. I scoured the document for something I could build, something that would be perfectly legal, utterly infuriating, and serve as a monument to her own hubris. I found it in Section 9, under Permitted Structures. The bylaws were incredibly specific about sheds, gazebos, and fences. But they were strangely vague about other things. Tucked away in a subclause was a line about homeowners being permitted to erect non-permanent structures for the pursuit of amateur hobbies or scientific research, provided they did not exceed the county height limit of 50 feet and were approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The committee, of course, was Carol. She would never approve anything for me. But the bylaws also stated that if the committee failed to respond to a submitted plan within 30 days, the plan was deemed approved by default. It was a standard clause, designed to prevent a committee from pocket vetoing projects by simply ignoring them. And it was the loophole I was going to drive a truck through. I spent a week designing my hobby structure. As a structural engineer, I had access to professional CAD software. I drew up a detailed, technically flawless set of blueprints. The project was titled The Miller Array, a study in passive solar collection and atmospheric data relay. It was, in essence, a tower. It was a 48-foot tall, slender steel lattice structure, anchored to a massive concrete base. At the top was a complex-looking collection of what appeared to be solar panels, satellite dishes, and weather monitoring equipment. It was hideous. It was an industrial monstrosity designed to look as out of place as possible in a manicured suburban neighborhood. And, according to the sunpath analysis I ran, its shadow would fall directly across Carol's prize-winning rose garden and her back patio from approximately 1 p.m. until sunset every single day. She loved to host afternoon garden parties. This tower would plunge her entire backyard into a deep, permanent shade. It was poetic justice, delivered via applied engineering. I put the application package together. It was a work of art. It included the professional blueprints, a geological survey of my property, a structural engineering analysis complete with wind load calculations, and a 10-page project description filled with impenetrable technical jargon. It looked more like a proposal for a NASA project than a backyard hobby. I made sure it was so dense and intimidating that no layperson would even attempt to read it. I sent the package via registered mail to the HOA, addressed to the Architectural Review Committee. The 30-day clock started ticking. The next phase was setting the trap for her personal conduct. I needed to bait her into an outburst, an illegal act, and I needed to catch it on camera. The perfect opportunity was her crusade against Helen's garden. The 30-day deadline to remove it was approaching. I decided to let it pass. On the 31st day, I received an email from Carol. It was short and seething. Your deadline has passed. The garden will be removed tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. by a professional landscaping crew. You will be billed accordingly. The next morning, I was ready. I had my cameras recording. I had a copy of the state laws regarding trespassing and property destruction printed out. At 8:55 a.m., a large truck from Bradshaw and Sons Landscaping pulled up. Two men got out, carrying shovels and wheelbarrows. And right behind them was Carol, marching across my lawn like a conquering general. I stepped out onto my front porch. "Carol," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "You and your men are trespassing on my property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." She scoffed. "This is HOA business, Frank. We are here to enforce the bylaws. Your little weed patch is coming out," she gestured to her men. "Get started." The men hesitated, looking from her to me. "Just a moment," I said, holding up a hand. "To the two of you," I said, addressing the landscapers directly, "I want you to know that you are currently being recorded. If you take one step into that garden or disturb a single plant, I will be pressing charges against you for criminal trespass and destruction of property. You will be sued personally, as will your employer. I just want to make sure you understand the legal jeopardy you are in before you proceed." I then looked at Carol. "And as for you, Carol, this is your final warning. Leave my property now." Her face flushed with rage. "How dare you? You can't speak to me like that. This is my right. It's in the bylaws." "The bylaws do not give you the right to trespass," I said evenly. "They allow you to hire a contractor and bill me. They do not allow you to lead a work crew onto my land without my permission. That is a crime. And it's all being recorded." She was practically vibrating with fury. She took a step towards me, her finger jabbing the air. "You think you're so smart, you old fool. I will not be intimidated. This garden is coming out if I have to pull every weed myself." She then stormed over to the garden, grabbed a fistful of lavender, and ripped it out of the ground, roots and all. She threw the mangled plant at my feet. "There," she shrieked. "It started. What are you going to do now?" "Thank you, Carol," I said softly. "That's exactly what I needed." I held up my phone, which had also been recording. The red light was blinking. Her eyes went wide. The two landscapers, seeing the situation for what it was, quickly packed up their tools and retreated to their truck. They wanted no part of this. "You recorded me," she sputtered, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. "Every second," I confirmed. "The trespass, the threats, the destruction of my property. It's all here. Now, for the last time, get off my land before I call the sheriff." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor of self-righteousness. She had overplayed her hand, and she knew it. She turned without another word and stalked back to her house. I picked up the bruised lavender plant. The scent of it filled the air, a sad, sweet perfume. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. That afternoon, I called the sheriff's department and filed a formal report for trespassing and vandalism, providing them with the high-definition video evidence. An officer came out, took my statement, and paid a visit to Carol. I didn't expect much to come of it, a warning, maybe a small fine, but the point was to create an official paper trail. It was another block in the evidentiary structure I was building. Meanwhile, the 30-day clock on my tower application had run out. I had received no response from the Architectural Review Committee. As per the bylaws, my plan was now approved by default. I filed the plans with the city building department the next day. The clerk was impressed by the thoroughness of my application. "Don't usually see residential plans this detailed," he commented. "You an engineer or something?" "Something like that," I replied. The permit was approved in less than a week. I hired a contractor, a small, independent crew I trusted from my old professional days, and ordered the steel. Phase 1 was complete. The bait was taken, the trap was set. Now it was time to build. The first sign of construction was the arrival of a concrete truck. The sound of it churning and groaning its way up our quiet suburban street was enough to bring a few curious neighbors out of their houses. They watched as the crew poured a massive 10 by 10 foot concrete slab in the corner of my backyard. Carol was on her deck in an instant, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. She watched the entire process, her gaze burning a hole in the back of my neck. I gave her a polite, friendly wave. She did not return it. The next day, the prefabricated steel lattice sections arrived on a flatbed truck. The moment the crew started unloading them, my phone rang. It was Carol. "What is the meaning of this, Frank?" she demanded, her voice tight with restrained fury. "What is all that metal junk in your yard?" "That, Carol, is my new hobby project," I said cheerfully. "The Miller Array. It's for my atmospheric research. The Architectural Review Committee approved it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The committee never approved any such thing." I would know. "Well, you had 30 days to respond to my application," I explained, my voice dripping with false innocence. "The bylaws are quite clear. No response within 30 days constitutes an automatic approval. I have the registered mail receipt and the city-issued building permit right here if you'd like to see them." I could hear a sputtering sound, like a car engine failing to turn over. You tricked me. That is an illegal structure. I will have it torn down." "It's fully permitted and compliant with all HOA bylaws and city codes," I said. "If you attempt to interfere with the construction, I'll have you charged with harassment." Again. "By the way, how did your chat with the sheriff's deputy go?" She slammed the phone down. "The first 20-foot section of the tower went up that afternoon. It was glorious. A beautiful, skeletal finger of galvanized steel pointing directly at the heavens. More importantly, it was now tall enough to begin casting a shadow. I watched with immense satisfaction as the tip of that shadow crept across my lawn, over the property line, and began its slow, inexorable journey across Carol's pristine, sun-drenched patio. Her reaction was immediate and predictable. She came storming over, ignoring the property line completely, and started screaming at my construction crew. "Stop this at once. You are building an illegal structure. Take it down. Take it down now." My foreman, a burly man named Gus who had seen it all, just looked at her. "Ma'am, we have a valid permit from the city. We're just doing our job. You need to clear the worksite. It's a safety hazard. I am the HOA president. I am the law here," she shrieked. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped out from my back door, my phone recording. "Carol, you're trespassing again," I said calmly. "And you're interfering with a licensed and permitted construction project. Gus is right, you need to leave before someone gets hurt. You are not allowed to build this monstrosity," she yelled, her eyes wild. "It's an eyesore. It's lowering everyone's property values. According to the bylaws you love so much, I'm perfectly within my rights," I said. "Maybe you should have read my application more carefully." She then made a critical error. In her rage, she lunged past me and tried to grab a wrench from one of the workers' tool belts. Gus intercepted her easily, holding her by the shoulders. "That's it," I said. "Assault. That's a new 1-inch." I looked at Gus. "You okay?" He nodded, his expression grim. "I'm fine, Frank. But she's out of control." Carol seemed to realize what she had done. The fight went out of her. She shook herself free from Gus's grip and retreated, muttering threats under her breath. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," was the last thing I heard as she stomped back to her own yard. I certainly hope so, I said to myself. I saved the video file, labeling it, Assault and Trespassing, Incident 2. My collection of evidence was growing nicely. The next HOA meeting was my stage for the first reveal. I knew Carol would try to use it to rally the homeowners against me. I came prepared. The tower was now fully erected, all 48 feet of it, though the equipment at the top had yet to be installed. It loomed over the neighborhood, a bizarre monument to spite. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. Carol had clearly been canvassing, whipping up fear about property values and aesthetics. She started the meeting by launching into a tirade against me. A blatant and malicious violation of our community standards, she was saying, her voice filled with righteous indignation. Mr. Miller has exploited a minor loophole to erect an industrial eyesore that harms us all. He has shown nothing but contempt for his neighbors and for the rules that keep our community beautiful. Therefore, the board has voted to levy the maximum possible fine of $100 per day until the illegal structure is removed. We are also seeking a court injunction to have it forcibly dismantled. She looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Miller?" "I do, as a matter of fact," I said, walking to the podium. I had a laptop with me and a small projector. I connected it and a video file appeared on the screen behind her. "Before we discuss the fully legal and permitted structure on my property," I began, "I'd like to address the pattern of harassment and illegal activity perpetrated by our HOA president." I clicked play. The first video began, showing Carol trespassing in my yard, screaming at the landscapers, and ripping Helen's lavender out of the ground. The audio was crystal clear. Gasps rippled through the room. Carol's face went pale. "This is an invasion of my privacy. You can't show this." "This took place on my property, Carol," I said coolly. "There's no expectation of privacy when you're committing a crime in someone else's yard." I then played the second video. The one of her storming onto the construction site, screaming at Gus and his crew, and attempting to assault one of the workers. The homeowners watched, their expressions shifting from disapproval of my tower to shock at their president's behavior. "This is the leadership of our community," I said, pausing the video on a close-up of Carol's enraged face. "Someone who trespasses, destroys property, and physically accosts contractors. Someone who believes she is above the very rules she enforces, not to mention the actual law. The daily fines are an illegal retaliation, and they will be treated as such." I looked out at the assembled residents. The tower is a direct result of this president's abuse of power. It started when she built an illegal wall that destroyed my property value, a wall built by her brother-in-law's company at a grossly inflated price, I might add. It escalated when she tried to destroy my late wife's memorial garden. The tower, as ugly as it may be, is a direct and legal response to illegal and unethical actions. I let that sink in. The room was silent. Carol was apoplectic. "Lies. All of it. He's a liar. He's twisting everything," she shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "He's the one destroying this community." But her credibility was gone. The video evidence was undeniable. People were looking at her differently now, with doubt and dawning suspicion. They had seen the mask slip, and the face underneath was ugly. I hadn't won them over completely, but I had planted a seed of rebellion. I had revealed the first major crack in her foundation. And I knew that with enough pressure, the whole rotten structure would come crashing down. Feeling cornered, Carol escalated from vicious to unhinged. Her campaign against me went nuclear. She seemed to understand that the battle could no longer be won with bylaws and fines. She was trying to destroy my reputation and my life. A few days after the meeting, a new flyer appeared on every doorstep in Eagle's Crest. It didn't have the HOA logo on it, but the venomous prose was unmistakably Carol's. It was a poison pen letter, filled with accusations and innuendo. It painted me as a dangerous and unstable recluse. It mentioned my tower not as a hobby project but as a surveillance platform, used to spy on our children. It hinted at dark reasons for my recent move to the community, suggesting I was running from something. The final line was a masterpiece of malicious suggestion. Concerned parents should ask themselves what kind of man builds a 50-foot tower to look down on our backyards and playgrounds. It was a thinly veiled, utterly disgusting accusation of pedophilia. I felt a cold, sick rage rise in my chest as I read it. This wasn't about a wall or a garden anymore. This was a vile, personal attack designed to make me a pariah, to drive me out of my own home through fear and ostracism. My neighbors started looking at me with suspicion. The friendly waves stopped. When I walked my dog, people would hurry their children inside. The poison was working. Simultaneously, I received a letter from the State Board of Professional Engineers. A formal complaint had been filed against me by a concerned citizen, alleging professional misconduct and ethical violations. It claimed I had used my engineering credentials to intimidate and defraud the homeowners association and that my so-called research tower was a structurally unsound hazard that endangered the public. Even though I was retired, the complaint was serious. It triggered a formal review process that could result in the revocation of my license, a permanent stain on a career I had spent 40 years building with integrity. It was a low blow, aimed at the heart of my professional identity. She was trying to burn everything to the ground. But she was a sloppy arsonist. She left trails everywhere. I hired a lawyer, an old friend named Tom who specialized in defamation cases. He immediately filed a cease and desist letter against Carol regarding the flyers and began preparing a lawsuit. We also drafted a formal response to the engineering board, providing them with the full set of blueprints, the city permits, and a detailed account of Carol's harassment campaign. But I knew a lawsuit would take months, even years. I needed something faster. I needed to end this now. I needed the final piece of evidence, the one that would transform this from a civil dispute into a criminal case she couldn't escape. And then, he appeared. Like a deus ex machina in a cheap play. His name was Dave. He was the nervous-looking man who always sat next to Carol at the HOA meetings, the treasurer. He showed up at my doorstep one evening, after dark, looking over his shoulder as if he were a spy in a foreign country. He was clutching a thick manila envelope to his chest. "Mr. Miller," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Can I come in? I can't be seen here." I ushered him inside, my curiosity piqued. He looked like a man at the end of his rope. He was pale, sweating, and his hands trembled. "I'm the HOA treasurer, Dave Jensen," he said, sinking into an armchair in my living room. "I saw what you did at the meeting. The videos." He trailed off, taking a deep breath. "She's out of control, Mr. Miller. Completely. What she's doing to you, it's not right. The flyers, the complaint to the engineering board, that was her. She bragged about it." "I figured as much," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "What can I do for you, Dave?" "It's what I can do for you," he said. He slid the manila envelope across the coffee table. "I shouldn't be doing this. She'll ruin me if she finds out. But I can't be a part of it anymore. I can't." I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers. On top was a copy of the invoice for the privacy wall from Bradshaw and Sons Construction. It was the same one I had seen before. But this one was different. This one had handwritten notes in the margins. Beneath it were bank statements. The HOA's account, and another set from a private account under the name Carol Bradshaw, and then there were the emails. A long, damning chain of correspondence between Carol and her brother-in-law, Dennis. It was all there, in black and white. The entire scheme. They had conspired to inflate the cost of the wall by over 100%. The invoice was padded with charges for materials that were never used and labor hours that were never worked. The HOA paid the fraudulent invoice. Then, Dennis Bradshaw would transfer half of the overage, a kickback of nearly $40,000, directly into Carol's personal bank account. The emails laid out the whole plan, complete with condescending remarks about how none of the idiot homeowners would ever be smart enough to notice. "She made me process the payment," Dave whispered, his voice cracking. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared. "She threatened to have me fired from my real job. Said she had friends on the board of my company. I have a family, a mortgage. I just did what she said." "You're doing the right thing now, Dave," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was the kill shot. The accusations about my tower were a nuisance. The defamation was ugly. But this was hard, irrefutable evidence of multiple felonies, wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. "Why now?" I asked. "The flyers," he said, shaking his head. "Accusing you of that. It's just evil. And she's planning something else." I heard her on the phone with her brother-in-law. "They were talking about your tower. About taking care of it themselves. They were laughing. I think they're going to try to damage it, to make it look unsafe." It was a new level of criminal stupidity. They were planning to vandalize my property to prove it was a hazard. "Thank you, Dave," I said, looking him in the eye. "You have no idea how much this helps. I will make sure your name is kept out of it for as long as possible." He nodded, looking relieved. He left as quietly as he came, a ghost of a man who had finally found his courage. I held the documents in my hand. It was the final piece of the puzzle. I now had proof of her harassment, her vandalism, her defamation, and her financial crimes. The foundation of her little empire wasn't just cracked, it was rotten to the core. The next morning, I did not call my lawyer. I did not call the sheriff. I called the district attorney's office and requested a meeting with their white-collar crime division. The meeting with the assistant district attorney was everything I hoped it would be. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 30s named Ms. Chen. I laid out the entire story, chronologically, just as I would present an engineering report. I started with the wall, the harassment, and the turning point with Helen's garden. I showed her the videos of the trespassing and the assault. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. Then I presented Dave's envelope. I walked her through the fraudulent invoices, the bank statements showing the kickbacks, and the email chains where Carol and her brother-in-law planned the whole thing. Ms. Chen's eyes lit up. This was the kind of case prosecutors dream of, greedy, arrogant criminals who were careless enough to put everything in writing. This is an exceptionally well-documented case, Mr. Miller, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. The video evidence establishes a pattern of harassment, and these financial documents, she tapped the stack with her pen, are a slam dunk for felony fraud and embezzlement. She was particularly interested in Dave's warning that they were planning to damage my tower. So, they are actively planning another crime, she mused. That's very helpful. We formulated a plan. The DA's office would open a formal investigation immediately, but quietly. They would subpoena the full, unredacted bank and phone records for Carol and Dennis Bradshaw. They wanted to let Carol feel like she was winning, to give her enough rope to hang herself and her brother-in-law. We want them both, Ms. Chen said. The conspiracy charge is the one that will carry the most prison time. The final showdown, we decided, should be public. A special HOA meeting seemed like the perfect venue. I told her I could get one called, citing the illegal fines and the president's conduct. We'll have investigators there, undercover, she said. We'll let you present your case to the homeowners. We want to see her reaction. People like this, when publicly confronted with the truth, they tend to confess loudly. The trap was now a cage, and the door was about to swing shut. I spent the next 2 weeks organizing. I drafted a petition calling for a special meeting to discuss the financial mismanagement and executive misconduct of the HOA board. I went door to door, speaking to my neighbors one-on-one. I didn't show them the fraud documents, that was my ace in the hole, but I did show them the videos of Carol's unhinged behavior. Seeing the raw footage, away from Carol's intimidating presence at the meetings, had a powerful effect. People who had been afraid to speak up were now angry. They had been paying their dues in good faith, only to have the money used to fund the president's personal vendettas and, as I hinted, her family's pockets. I got the signatures I needed in 2 days. The meeting was set. The stage was built. The night before the meeting, my security cameras paid off one last time. Around 2 a.m., a motion alert pinged my phone. I watched the live feed in disbelief. 2 figures, dressed in dark hoodies, were creeping into my backyard. It was Carol's brother-in-law, Dennis, and his son. They were carrying a large bolt cutter and a portable power saw. They went straight for my tower. Dennis attached the bolt cutters to one of the steel support struts and began to squeeze. The high-definition camera captured every detail, their faces, their tools, their clumsy, criminal actions. The audio picked up their conversation perfectly. Just cut a few of these bolts, make it look like it's about to fall over, Dennis grunted. Your aunt wants it to look real dangerous. We'll call the city inspector in the morning, say it's an immediate public hazard. They managed to sever 2 bolts and were starting to saw into a tension cable when I activated the floodlights and the siren I had installed as part of the security system. The yard was bathed in brilliant white light, and a deafening alarm shattered the night. They froze like startled rats, then scrambled back over the fence and fled. I saved the video file, labeling it, Conspiracy to Commit Property Damage, Final. I sent a copy to Ms. Chen at the DA's office with a simple message, they took the bait. See you tomorrow night. The community center was packed. Word had spread that this was going to be a showdown, and nobody wanted to miss it. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Carol sat at the front table, looking smug. She clearly believed this meeting was her chance to publicly crucify me and solidify her power. She had no idea she was attending her own execution. Scattered throughout the audience were 3 plainclothes investigators from the DA's office. They looked like bored suburban dads. The meeting began with Carol attempting to take control, trying to shut down my motion before I could even speak. but the homeowners, emboldened by their numbers, shouted her down. "Let him speak! Let him speak!" I walked to the podium and set up my projector. "Good evening," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the crowded room. "We're here tonight because our community has a problem. We have a problem with leadership, a problem with transparency, and a problem of outright crime." I started my presentation. I didn't begin with the money. I began with the people. I told them about my wife, Helen, and the garden. I told them about how I came to Eagle's Crest seeking peace. I showed them the violation notices for my lawn, my mailbox, my garbage cans. I laid the foundation of petty, targeted harassment. Then, I played the videos again. Carol ripping up the flowers. Carol assaulting the contractor. Her rage-filled face, 20 feet high on the projection screen, was even more damning in a room full of her constituents. "This is not leadership," I said quietly. "This is bullying." I moved to the next phase. The wall. "We were told this wall was a community improvement," I said, putting a picture of the ugly pine fence on the screen. "We were not told that it was an illegal structure built on a county easement. We were not told that the contractor was the president's own brother-in-law. And we were certainly not told how much we were being overcharged." Then I put the documents on the screen. The fraudulent invoice from Bradshaw and Sons, side by side with a legitimate quote from another local company showing they could have done the job for half the price. $40,000, I said, letting the number hang in the air. 40,000 of our dollars, paid for materials we never received and labor that was never performed. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People were starting to do the math. They were looking at their own HOA fee statements in a new, horrifying light. Carol was on her feet. "This is slander. These are fabricated documents. You can't prove any of this." "Oh, but I can," I said, and I projected the first email between her and Dennis Bradshaw. The one where they discussed inflating the bid. The room fell into a stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop. I put the next slide up. It was a simplified flowchart I had drawn. One box showed the HOA account. Another showed the Bradshaw and Sons account. A third showed Carol's personal account. Red arrows illustrated the flow of money, from the HOA, to the contractor, and then the kickback, right into her pocket. I displayed the bank statements showing the exact transfers, with the dates lining up perfectly. "This is called embezzlement," I explained calmly. "And this," I added, clicking to the next slide which showed the email chain planning it all, "is called conspiracy to commit fraud. These are felonies. Each one carries a potential prison sentence of up to 10 years. The color drained from Carol's face. Her smugness was replaced by sheer, animal panic. She looked around the room, at the faces of her neighbors, and saw only cold, hard accusation. "But the story doesn't end there," I continued, my voice relentless. "Because when criminals get cornered, they get desperate." I played the final video. The one from the night before. The grainy, night vision footage of Dennis Bradshaw and his son attempting to sabotage my tower. The audio was clear, especially the part where Dennis said, "Your aunt wants it to look real dangerous." The room erupted. The spell was broken. People were shouting, pointing at Carol, their fear finally replaced by righteous fury. And that's when Carol completely and utterly melted down. "He's the criminal," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He drove me to it. With his horrible tower and his smug attitude. He deserved it. All of you deserve it. You're all a bunch of ungrateful peasants. I made this community what it is. Me." It was a full confession, screamed at the top of her lungs. It was better than Miss Chin could have ever hoped for. On that cue, the 3 investigators stood up. 2 of them walked calmly toward the podium. The third went to the exit to block any escape. Carol Bradshaw, the lead investigator, said, flashing his badge. "You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Her brain simply couldn't process it. She stared at him, then at me, her mind snapping. And that's when she delivered her final, pathetic threat. "You can't do this. I will ruin you. I will burn your whole life to the ground." As the 2 deputies, who had been called in to assist, cuffed her hands behind her back, she continued to thrash and scream. It was a pathetic, Ugly end to a pathetic, ugly reign. They led her out of the room, her shrieks echoing down the hallway until they were cut off by the closing doors. Dennis Bradshaw was arrested at his home less than an hour later. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The HOA was thrown into receivership for a short time before a new, interim board was elected. It was composed of reasonable people who were genuinely interested in the community, not in power. The case against Carol and her brother-in-law was airtight. Faced with the mountain of evidence, they both took plea deals. Carol was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus hefty fines. Her house was sold to cover the debt. Dennis got a lighter sentence in exchange for his full cooperation, but he lost his contractor's license and his business. The community began to heal. The first official act of the new HOA board was to vote unanimously to tear down the spite wall. I watched from my deck as the same crew that had built it, now under new management, dismantled it piece by piece. With each panel that came down, a slice of my valley, my sky, my peace, was returned to me. A few weeks later, my own hobby tower was also dismantled. Its purpose had been served. It had been an ugly, beautiful thing, a catalyst for justice. Once it was gone, my backyard returned to normal, save for the large concrete slab I decided to keep. I turned it into the base for a new gazebo. I was sitting in that gazebo a few months later. The legal battles were over. The engineering board had dismissed the complaint against me with a formal apology. My lawyer had won a sizable settlement from Carol's homeowner's insurance in the defamation suit, which I quietly donated to the state park service that managed the valley. My neighbors treated me with a sort of quiet respect. I was the man who had slain the dragon. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had simply wanted to be left alone, who had been pushed until he had no choice but to push back with everything he had. I sat there, a cup of coffee in my hand, looking out at the unobstructed, panoramic view. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Helen's garden was thriving, a riot of color and life. The world felt quiet. The foundations were sound again. And I was finally at peace.